Okay, so I want to record this video to show you how to use a really cool function in Excel called choose. And I'm going to break it down into its subcomponent parts. One of the things about the book that you've been using in class is that he tends to, give you these really complicated formulas and not really, they're so complicated that you're so busy just copying what he's done, and you don't really think about what it is that you're trying to do. So let's step back a bit in a minute and talk about, first of all, this common-sized statement of cash flows. Now, when you do a common-sized statement, that's really helpful sort of in analysis for being easier to compare one company to another and to compare how you're doing from one year to the next without getting conflated with the absolute values of the numbers. And common-sized income statements, by standard, all the subcomponent parts are divided by the total sales to give you a percent of sales. And likewise, common-sized balance sheets, the denominator is total assets. So every piece of the balance sheet in a common-sized balance sheet is divided by total assets. When you're talking about a common-sized statement of cash flows, there's not just that standard expectation that there's going to be one thing specifically as the denominator. So this is a common-sized statement of cash flows where all the percentages, all the flows are given as a percent of sales. So here we have net income given as a percentage of sales, as well as all these various cash flows, which we calculated previously, given as a percentage of sales. But sometimes people are interested in seeing cash flows given as a percent of the beginning cash of the year, right? And so one thing we could do, we could just take and copy this whole sheet, right? And then make a new sheet and say, and change the denominator and have it be a common-sized statement of cash flows with beginning cash as the denominator, but we don't want to do that. We want to be elegant, as they say. And so what we want to do is create a toggle switch, which allows us on this sheet to switch back and forth between using sales revenue as the denominator in our percentages or using beginning cash as the denominator. And so the way that we do that in Excel is we use a function called choose, right? Now, a couple of things I want to note before we get started on setting up this function. One thing is that I've brought over, you see this section down here, I've brought over the value of total sales revenue and beginning cash onto this sheet. This whole exercise is complicated enough without adding the additional complication of having to switch back and forth between sheets. So let's just go ahead and have everything we need right in front of us so we can learn this function as simply as possible, right? So I pulled over beginning sales revenue from the income statement. There you can see the cell reference up there. And I pulled over beginning cash from the balance sheet. You can see the reference up there, right? So here we have our values that we're going to be working with as our two denominator options. And let's just go ahead initially and just set up our toggle switch area. So we're going to go denominator, NA and let's just use the number 1 here. Now, the other thing is, when you are learning a new function, right, before you go and try to do anything with the function, just check the function itself and make sure that it works the way that you want it to before you go to try to insert it into any kind of a formula or use it in any meaningful way in your spreadsheet. You want to just have a little sort of sandbox area where you're testing it. You can always erase it later. You can erase your test area. But this is sort of just, it's what I do and what I have done for 20 years, learning new Excel tricks, which, by the way, this is a new Excel trick. I didn't know this a week ago, so that's kind of exciting. I think it's really cool. All right, so let's talk about what it is that we're trying to do here. Basically, what we want to do is set up a situation where we switch from having the sales revenue as a denominator for our common size percentages to having beginning cash as a denominator for our common size percentages. So let's write out the logic of what we're trying to do here for the function of choosing. Okay. Okay. Oops, what am I doing here? Okay. So, in plain English then, what we are trying to do is we want to set sales as the denominator. If the number in F1 up there is 1, right? So we're using the value in this cell up here, F1, as our switch. And we want to set beginning cash as the denominator if the number in F1 is 2, right? So that's what we want to do. We want to set up it. We want to make a switch so that if the number up here in our switch is 1, we use sales as a denominator, or if the number is 2, we use beginning cash as the denominator. So let's do just a little translation into Excel speak. Okay. Okay, so what we want to do is we're going to set the value in B26 as the denominator if F1 is 1, right? So our value down here in B26 is our sales value, right? So we want to set the value in B26 as the denominator if F1 is 1, and we want to set the value in B27, which is beginning cash, as the denominator if the value in F1 is 2, right? So that's what we're trying to do here. Now, when you are talking to Excel, the language that you use is called a syntax. So I just want to show you what the syntax is so that you can see what you're aiming for. So in the syntax of Excel, okay, we're going to have a function that looks like choose, and then you open a parenthesis, and you choose based on the index value in cell F1, and you choose for the first index value, you choose B26, and for the second syntax value, you want to choose B27. Now you'll notice that I have made these absolute cell references, but I have only put the $ in front of the row number. That's because just the way that this particular spreadsheet is, the only element of the cell address that I don't want to change is the row value. It doesn't really matter if I set the column values to be constant. When you have that $ in front of one half or the other of the cell address, that's the piece which stays the same. So for this, all we need is those $ in front of the numbers. Okay. So this is our what the function is going to look like inside. Now if I set an equal sign, then this will actually invoke the actual function. So I'm going to say F1. That's our index number, right? So once I put in a comma, it prompts me then. So my value 1 is this one down here, B26. Put a $ in front of the 26 to keep the row constant, and then our value for the index number 2 is going to be B27. Put that $ in there, close the parenthesis, hit enter, and if we fix that formatting, there it is. All right, it's 3.85 million. Now if I go ahead and change this number up here, you know what, oh. So if I change this number up here to 2, hit enter, okay, this number changes to 57,600. Pretty cool, huh? Okay. Now let's change this back to 1 so that our numbers don't change over here when we start adjusting the formulas. right? So here's our function. We've got it set up. We've got it working. We have tested it. And now what we want to do is replace what's in the denominator of these formulas already, which is just a simple reference down to sales revenue, right? So we want to change that out, and we want to substitute the denominator B26 here. We want to change that out to our choose function. So let's go ahead and copy this. You don't copy the equal sign. Copy, and now, oops, we paste it here. Okay, and now all we have to do is just autofill that right down the row. Right, the numbers don't change, but what's in those formulas does change. And if I double click on the calculation there, it'll show me what are the numbers that it's referring to. It's referring up here and then down to these two. Right, so we finish. Let's copy this and paste here and paste there. The numbers have not changed. Nothing is different yet because our denominator here is still 1. But if I change this denominator to 2, now all of these numbers change as well, all these calculations, right? So we had 200% of what we started with, what our beginning cash flow, tied up in inventory over the course of the year, okay? So that is how you actually set up the choose value. Now I'm going to pause this recording for a second, and then we're going to come back in and we're going to talk about how we change the text of the column header, to also change when this thing switches, okay? Okay, after a brief pause, I'm back here, and what I want to address is applying this choose function to the words, to the actual text value up here in cell B2, which is the column header, right? So you'll note that right now this says percent of sales, but we know that our denominator at this point it's actually a percent of beginning cash. And so we can actually set up this column header such that it is actually calculated based on the inputs, on the logical inputs, and it returns text values based on a mathematic function that Excel does. It's again, a really cool Excel trick, right? And we're not going to go too much into the logic of how it works. I just want to very, very slowly and carefully go through exactly what you do, okay? So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to erase this formula, or this text string here, right? So now it's blank. So now what we want to do is indicate to Excel by the use of the equal sign that we're about to do something, do a function, and the first thing we want to do is indicate that in all cases we want percent of to show up. Now, since you are using a function, you need to indicate that you want text to be returned by using the quotation mark. So we'll say percent of, and then make your blank, and then close the parenthesis. I'm sorry, the quotation mark. And then we're going to do something called concatenating, which is when you get Excel to sort of add text strings together. And again, we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail later in the course, but right now what you want, again, is that second quotation mark, the ampersand or and sign, and then we go ahead and use our choose function again. And just like we did before, we want to choose based on F1 over here, except this time we aren't going to say choose this number or that number, right? What we want to say is that if the number there is 1, we want it to return the word sales. So indicate that you want a word by using a quotation mark. Then type out sales and close the quotation. That's the value that we want to show up. If we have a 1 in that slot, put in a comma, quotation mark again, and the value that we want to show up if we have a number 2 in that slot is beginning cash. Close the quotation, close the parenthesis, hit enter, right? So now this is now showing up as percent of beginning cash. If I change this to the number 1, not only will my calculations change, but so will my column header. And again, I just think that's so cool, which really tells you that I'm the biggest nerd in the world, but hey, that's okay. All right, you guys, have at it. Have fun. I'll see you in class.